what up, guys? Welcome back to Think Shank. We are jumping into a quick video. I just want to cover a few early trends in the 2025 NBA season that I've noticed I've done some poking around on and thought work on, and I just want to share it with you. Number one is coming out of the gate swinging is I believe that the Boston Celtics are going to have a similar magnitude of impact strategically on how teams are built and utilized as the Dynasty Warriors. Why is that? Instead of forcing everybody to take threes because the Warriors had some of the best shooters of all time and they could just catch fire and create an insurmountable gap on the scoreboard in the span of a couple minutes, the Celtics are forcing teams to have to play make and have those facilitation skills distributed more throughout the entire lineup. The age of heliocentrism is basically over now. You can't really create advantages very easily on Boston's perimeter because of its switch everything defense and the level of tenacity and defensive talent it possesses. And so operating outside in, like your Luka Doncic's or Jalen Brunson's or James Harden's, it's just gonna be really, really hard, which is why, to me, the age of heliocentrism is pretty much over. And I think that that is, in a nutshell, a big reason why the Celtics are going to leave a very long-lasting impact on the NBA. If your roster mostly only allows for playing that kind of way, you essentially have to have 40% three-point shooters from its 2 through 4, or you have to have homogeneous playmaking skill distributed throughout those positions as well, probably including the center, in order to even have a chance at keeping pace with the Celtics in generating those advantages that ultimately lead to an open three-point shot. Offensively, what defines a team's offensive strategy is how they create advantages to then play off of. Boston has constructed a strategy that creates a certain breed of advantages that lead to specifically open threes. Playmaking and shooting gravity are the two primary tools that they use in order to deliver on that strategy. What it does is it allows good enough off the dribble penetration. Just because nobody can leave their guy, you can't sit in the gaps against Boston because everybody's able and willing to shoot, leads to forced rotations, and then everybody knows where to relocate to automatically help open up an open kick out for somebody else who is also going to be diving to the hole and get the whole spin cycle going. It's interesting to note, it's not like the Boston Celtics have a Kyrie Irving or a Ja Morant or an Anthony Edwards that can just be dynamite going off the dribble and getting downhill and consistently creating those advantages in that one-on-one setting. Obviously, everybody knows they are hunting open threes, and you don't look at Derek White and think, oh man, that's an incredible rim finisher. No, it's that he's good enough at getting himself downhill, creating those one-on-one advantages off the dribble, or sustaining an advantage by attacking a closeout that somebody else had created. The more I watch the Celtics, the more I see them dismantle the other teams just by constantly pulling on the tug-of-war rope and waiting for mental lapses of focus or execution errors. They're obviously only going to play their brand of basketball, but it's so prolific because it has invested in a roster that has the prevalence and just potency of outside shooting gravity and playmaking. Everybody can pass and everybody can shoot. That means you can just spam this stuff over and over again. It kind of reminds me more and more of the Harden Houston Rockets. And funny enough, everybody is complaining about how boring the Celtics are to watch, just like James Harden's Rockets back in the day where it was terrible to watch, but they would win like 63 games in the regular season playing that way. It's basically the final evolution of that, where if you think about Mike D'Antoni coaching those Rockets teams, how many times do you think he had thought to himself, man, if I could just inject James Harden's passing and shooting into everyone else on these lineups, and get this system self-propelling so that I wasn't wearing James all the way out and just had everyone relocating, I would bet my savings account that Mike D'Antoni had envisioned what the contemporary Celtics are doing. He obviously just didn't have the personnel to do that, and he was at the frontier of furthering this strategic concept. So in conclusion, if you maximize the volume and prowess of advantage creators on the roster that can specifically create advantages that lead to open threes while thwarting your opponent's advantage creators who are tasked with doing the same thing, you're chokeholding the game into either a 3-point or layup contest. All else held constant, like turnovers, fouls, whatever. Playing the Celtics way, you can really only lose because of either A, you just had a bad 3-point shooting night, B, your opponent went supernova from 3 and you just couldn't keep pace and fell behind, or C, the opponent sold out to the perimeter to force you to make layups, and then on the other side were able to keep pace in the amount of layups you were scoring or outpace you in the number of tough 3-point shots made. Revisiting the whole math game thing one more time, it's very simple what the Celtics do. We are going to generate and ultimately make a lot of threes. And then we are also going to prevent you from generating and making a lot of threes on defense. This is just capitalizing on the Steph Curry law of 3 is greater than 2. It is an enormous bonus to have that big of a scoring upgrade from this style of play. And that is what the Celtics have done here. Have advantage creators all over the court who can generate open threes as well as make threes, and then defend your ass off on the defensive end to stop the other team from being able to win that 3-point battle. I could actually theorize this team winning 70 games this year simply because, back to my original point, this team is having the same degree of early success and schematic pioneering as the 2015 Warriors. Teams don't know how to handle it, and they definitely don't know how to defend it. And it's kind of in that incubation period of defenses need to catch up. What kind of skill sets do we need on the roster? What kind of strategies need to be integrated? And so I can absolutely see a similar degree of domination this regular season. And that's in addition to the whole chip on the shoulder with Tatum and Brown and Team USA, whatever. I don't even think that stuff necessarily matters. Again, the infrastructure on a schematic level is just so advanced and bulletproof on both sides of the floor. I barely even consider that, honestly. 2, Milwaukee is fraudulently good. And the reason I say that is because its size offensively as well as defensively is able to present unique challenges for teams like Boston, as you might have seen in their game last night, where Milwaukee was in the driver's seat of that game for about 3 quarters, and then the focus lapses and execution errors pretty much led them to let the game get away from them. And again, with the tug-of-war metaphor, is Boston is constantly putting this pressure on you, playing their brand of basketball, similar to the Warriors, just waiting to cause a 3-point avalanche. And as soon as you're not getting 50-50 balls or executing properly, they are going to put numbers on the boards very, very fast. But specifically, the unique physicality conundrum between Giannis and Dame, I just think is really interesting because Giannis, everybody knows how he plays. He's trying to get to the rack, does not really shoot from outside of 10 feet, and he is going to put pressure on the free throw line as well as the rim, which obviously without Kristaps Porzingis is going to be an issue for Boston, and it was. And they were really mucking up the game, which I think is another deeper advantage because the rhythm and the pace and all the chaos and flying around really works in Boston's favor. Giannis is able to muck that up, right? Force Kornet and Tillman to come on the court and get more bigger bodies. Similarly, Sam Hauser barely even played. Missoula ended up going with Jordan Walsh simply because of his size and athleticism, because Burke Lopez, Bobby Portis, Giannis, these are very physical guys, and they were honestly getting killed, again, in that physicality war. And then the contrast is with Dame, where on the perimeter, he is just waiting to chuck up a three at the slightest amount of contact on these screens, which for a very physical, strong, perimeter, defensively oriented team like the Celtics, it caused a lot of issues because you just can't be as physical with him. Whole other topic of how the referees are going to call these types of contact, it's really still unclear, and that's really weird. But anyway, you just have to be super delicate and careful with guarding Dame on the perimeter. But then Giannis is a total freight train where you have to be ultra physical to even stand a chance at stopping him from scoring at the rim. The offensive rebounding piece, Boston really, really benefits from its tenacious guards, Jrue Holiday, Derek White, generating extra possessions from offensive rebounds, even defensive rebounds. And that was a problem for them. Again, with a front court like Giannis and Brook Lopez and Bobby Portis, like, these are pretty big guys. And those possessions that I've just come to expect, where a flying Jrue Holiday will just get a dagger offensive rebound and kill the other team's spirit or whatever, it just wasn't there. There were a lot of times they were doing the exact same thing, crashing the rebounds and trying to get it. But again, in those three quarters, it just wasn't there. Back to the Bucks now, it of course feels like they are betting on the offensive upgrades outweighing the defensive losses that they sustained last year and even previously. Guys like Gary Trent and Taurean Prince are supposedly solid wing defenders, but if you're watching any of these games, they are good defenders, but it just doesn't seem consistent enough and enough tenacity there where over the course of 48 minutes, you are able to put away really good teams like the Celtics. The Celtics beat them over effort and relentless execution, like most great teams do. End of the third into the fourth quarter, they just had a handful of snowballing kind of errors, Bobby Portis as well, losing 50-50 balls, missing defensive executions and things like that, and then all of a sudden everything spirals out of control. On the offensive end, the big thing for me is they still don't seem to have great synergy between Dame and Giannis. The two-man game, really, really sparse. Not entirely sure why and what, but this is a Doc Rivers team, and he is incapable of telling superstars what to do ever, so I'm not that surprised, but it's just kind of discouraging and disappointing. Very much still feels like a your turn, my turn type of thing. And yeah, they're really individually great. But when Milwaukee won the title and continued to win all these regular season games, they had a very fortified and cemented system in place on both sides of the ball. I think they really need to upend whatever the Giannis or Dame preferences are and find a way to synergize a lot better, particularly against these perimeter switch heavy, guard sort of driven Titans of the league. Like Oklahoma City and Boston, you guys should be running a two-man game until they cry. Like, they should be absolutely terrified. Like, Chet Holmgren should have his fourth foul by halftime. That is what I would be looking for if I was on the coaching staff of the Bucks. That is a literal goal I would give Dame and Giannis in those types of matchups. And granted, still were able to generate that against Boston. Obviously, their bigs and Al Horford, they tried their best. But you look at Anthony Davis and LeBron, which I feel like is the right facsimile here, is Davis is one of the best finishers in the league. Giannis as well. They obviously understand where to get guys, angles of screens, and how to do things in different situations. I mean, this should just be kind of a layup here. And it's really, really bizarre to me. And then it doesn't feel like the spark that a super bought-in, cohesive, contending team would have when the game is slipping away, like in that Boston matchup. I don't know if Giannis is just looking out the window at other teams and not really loving his situation. Like, I have no idea. But there's definitely an intangibles lack here, a leadership lack, and I think probably most of it just comes down to not elevating or maximizing offensively or defensively what the roster holds. There has been a rockier start for Minnesota than I expected. I guess in retrospect now, should not be surprisingly. It primarily stems from the defensive end of the floor, where you see a pretty insane turnover disparity. The Wolves have more than double the number as Dallas. Dallas has a 25-5 points off turnovers edge. They also doubled the Wolves in fast break points. You have to tip your hat to Karl-Anthony Towns, I think, because say whatever you want about his defensive abilities out in space on the perimeter, the guy hustled his absolute ass off running up and down the court, either defending in transition or trying to push in transition. And now I kind of feel like that's the biggest glaring hole here. The Wolves' transition defense, notoriously terrible. The Mavericks were able to capitalize a ton on that. Significantly helps when you have a 6'8" point guard, generational passing savant who can just chuck the ball down court at any time and hit anybody on the run and yada yada. That's just going to be a point of emphasis against a team like Dallas. But any sort of leak outs, it's just not something the Wolves were ever concerned about last year. And then the other component is rebounding, which, again, say whatever you want about Karl-Anthony Towns. Outside shooting, yeah, he's a really good outside shooter, but he only shoots 5 attempts a game. Why does he only get like 20 points one game and then like 13 the other game? Even in that 13-point game, I'll bet you my savings account, he probably has at least 12 rebounds. Julius Randle is not getting that for you. And so this stems to the post games from last night where Finch was asked about the defensive rebounding, and the first thing he said is, yeah, losing Cat sucks for that. So then the guards have to rebound as well now. It is a cognizant and very real shift that has to take place. Julius Randle is not even close to the rebounder that Karl-Anthony Towns is. You think about Rudy Gobert, of course, great, but in matchups like Dallas, where he's against super active guys like Lively and Gafford, he can box him out, but you have to actually get guys rushing in to secure the ball. The extension of that, though, is that if you have the guards needing to do that, it's gonna slow your transition offense as well as just potency. If Ant is now starting from getting a rebound under the rim as opposed to a hit-ahead pass from a 7-foot center in Cat, it's going to make things a little bit trickier. Not to mention just more tiring because you're just covering more ground. The other thing too is hiding and switching Rudy so he stays in the dunker spot is a little bit harder when you have Randle there because, again, Cat being 7 feet tall, being able to somewhat defend on the perimeter, obviously a lot better than Gobert, allowed those pre-switches and things to keep Gobert hidden or stationed near the rim for rebounding, shot contests, all of that. On the offensive end, though, Randle is definitely getting himself acclimated. Obviously, the facilitation and secondary playmaking was a huge point of emphasis for him. Obviously, it's also a strength, which you have to play to. Averaging around 5 assists, only 7 rebounds, but also slight concern. I mean, he's shooting really well. He's making around 50% of his threes, but he's only attempting 4 a game. It seems like really leaning into Ant's three-point shooting, which I'll get to in a second, has been fantastic, but Randle's downhill advantage creation, pressure gravitation, and then kickouts is a way that Finch clearly seems to align with. Possessing that level of scoring voltage inside of the mid-range and just getting downhill, I would argue is already on par with what Cat presented last year. The advantage is, again, it can be self-initiated from Randle. Cat, a little bit more dependent on that secondary kickout and attacking right off the catch. Randle can definitely more methodically get into certain spots on the floor where he knows he presents a lot of gravity and then have other stuff happening that can allow him to facilitate. Hopping over to Ant, the first thing has to be the outside shooting revelation, although I'm not sure if it's quite a revelation because he's always been pretty efficient and effective at it. But this season so far, small sample size, sure, he is averaging 42% on over 13 three-point attempts a game, which is basically right at that Jason Tatum level, but shooting even better. And he's not even in the Boston Celtics spaced out infrastructure of getting these nice passes and all this advantage sustaining and creation and all this stuff. Ant's just rising and firing off of the most basic screens, and they're really going in at a great clip. The other thing I noted is that the edge, as far as his competitiveness, fire, being that spark plug leader on the floor, it's felt even more pronounced during this acclimation period, which is just a promising observation in my mind. Bringing in Randall, losing Cat, bringing in DiVincenzo, having to sort of shift and evolve some of the schemes on the court. Even in that Lakers game, for example, he's getting himself and trying to get everyone else fired up, screaming, "Wake up," on the floor so loud you can hear it on the broadcast. I'm sure a lot of people will just see that and just go to the negative and think that's bad. I just watching basketball these years, like, there's just going to be a period of acclimation required to maximize and integrate really significant offensive pieces like Randall and DiVincenzo. So maybe the Rockier offensive production and flow just doesn't surprise me, but it is a good indicator to have your best player get himself and try to get everybody else locked into at least up the effort and intensity on the court. Even if the strategy isn't perfectly fleshed out, which Finch will admit it's not, you still have to be playing at a super high level of intensity against good teams. You don't have to be skilled to try really fucking hard, especially on defense. A lot of it is a mindset, and especially in rebounding, which is clearly a stalwart of theirs that they just need to fix. It just feels like one of those opportunities for Ant to, again, continue to solidify himself as the vocal leader of this team, and he's 23 years old. So it's just a promising indicator to me. Also want to call out DiVincenzo here. Definitely doesn't feel settled, and how they are going to weaponize him, I think, is actually a very, very big component of the ceiling of this team. He's really not shooting well right now, currently at 31% on all field goals and 27% on threes. Last night, Finch even said post-game that they missed him on the floor offensively a handful of times, and they need to get him more involved in the offense. For a host of reasons, he has validated his worth and willingness on the ball as a secondary facilitator, even primary to certain extents, but absolutely a primary kick-out target, with other guys creating set advantages, largely getting themselves downhill. He's only averaging 10 field goal attempts a game in about 26 minutes. I just genuinely feel like that needs to be higher, even if it's just to get him to feel like a placebo more integrated into the offense so that his on-ball and just shooting comfortability and confidence starts to develop. There were just moments last night in the Dallas game where he wasn't even running to the ball, trying to help the whole weaving offense to just help the ball move side to side and keep things loose and going. He just didn't seem very interested in getting involved. And then the other guys, especially in the secondary units like Alexander Walker, who played fantastically, weren't even looking for him. So I don't love that. Speaking of Alexander Walker, he is really, really playing well, and great story, great guy seemingly. Love that he's cousins with Shea and has worked his tail off to even get any meaningful minutes on an NBA team. In 22 minutes a game off the bench, he is averaging over 5 field goal attempts, shooting at 61%. But by far, most importantly to me, is he's shooting 67% on threes, closing in on 4 attempts a game. Putting points on the board matters. That's awesome. But even just as importantly, with a team like Minnesota, is establishing the perimeter potency to allow its downhill threats that it leans so heavily on to get closer and closer to the rim, generate the advantages, and then do the kickouts, or get free throws, finish at the rim, higher probability shots, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a really helpful indicator. I've talked about this at great length. The Alexander Walker and DiVincenzo, those are like the primary responsibilities that they have, is not just making threes, but the extension of that idea is you're just keeping the perimeter defenders out and away from Ant getting eaten alive, like we saw against Dallas in the conference finals last year. All right, guys, that's it so far for the season, and until next time.